impacting a generation, community, city and nation.
Compassion is supposed to be a positive word. Compassion generally means good things. Surely being compassionate should make you feel good as well as the benefactor of your compassion. You should at least expect that feeling of self-gratification you get when your benefactor has responded positively to the compassion you've shown them. Well, I think that compassion stinks. It's hard, it hurts, it can cause breakdown, pain and disappointment. True compassion comes from being out on a limb in a radical way. It truly is part of the project's genesis to exist for the hardest to reach young people. But it is no easy job. There are setbacks. Young people, particularly those who slip into the hardest to reach category, have this incredible ability to break your heart over and over again as they take one step forward and later two back. Peter spent his life just hanging around. I first met him hanging around outside a community centre, whittling a knife out of an old bit of wood that he had found. He came over to chat to me, still holding the well-produced, sharp wooden blade. At that moment, I wasn't really in the mood to talk myself out of an awkward situation, nor was I feeling particularly athletic should the need to run arise. So as Pete approached, I prepared my excuse. To my surprise, Pete was pleased to see me. He'd heard that I was involved with the youth club and he wanted to come with his mates. As we chatted, I became increasingly excited by the challenge that Pete and his mates would present those of us who ran the youth club. They sounded like they were in another league, a league I was quite keen to play in. This conversation was one of those catalytic occurrences that inevitably lead to some form of paradigm shift. Paradigm shift took place in my life, and it took place in the shaping of the project from that time onwards. Neither Pete nor I could imagine the journey we would go on together over the next 2 years, as we briefly chatted outside the community centre. Pete would go on to have a dramatic impact on the shaping of the project. Pete had worked on his ability to hang around for most of his life. The neglect he had experienced had resulted in missing out on key developmental stages in his early childhood, not least the ability to cope with the frustrations presented when he navigated through the terrible twos. The consequence was that Pete had been unable to engage with any form of education whatsoever. In our relatively prosperous country, I just couldn't and still can't fathom how a child can just not attend school. Pete had literally fallen through the system and was free falling into chaos. Without the daily distraction of school, Pete had to hang out and make his own fun. Pete quickly filled his time with less constructive activities. At 14, he'd become a contract burglar, stealing from other people and taking a tiny cut of the resale profits. After trying cannabis, he became addicted to the numbing effect it had on him. By the time he was 13, he had experimented with harder drugs. Anyone who stood in his way was injured in some way. Pete had slipped into a spiralling slide of chaos. No one really knew what Pete did with his life, and no one really cared. He was quickly becoming a statistic, one for whom tomorrow could quite conceivably be too late. I wonder if, as you read this, you're thinking the same as I thought. That sucks. Because of compassion, I was unable to sleep at night because I believed his situation to be so unjust. Unjust is a conservative way of putting it. I thought it downright unfair that a child should have such an existence. So as I contemplated another sleepless night, I decided that the unjust, chaotic spiral that Pete was in could be reversed. Pete didn't need a special quick-fix superhero youth worker answer. Pete needed long-term commitment and local support. And for the last few years, that is what Pete has got.
Get interested by thoughts that I did. Walking down the street, get pulled by a car. If you had a life like me, you won't go far.